Hey guys, welcome to the next installment of the GE800 restoration project. As you can see, I've got full-size CRT partially installed, and I've been cleaning up the Bakelite cabinet, which I'm happy to say is one of the finest examples of Bakelite I have ever encountered. If it wasn't for the owner having scratched his name into it in a few places, it would be darn near flawless. More on that later. For better or worse, there's going to be a whole lot of flapping in this video. So, those of you who just want or would rather see solder smoke and tubes glowing and such, this video isn't for you. You might want to just skip to my next project or the next installment because, well, a few things. One, a lot of you have stuck through this project with me and left a lot of good suggestions and questions and thoughts. I want to address those. And also I want to do this while all this is fresh on my mind because I had to do a lot of research. I've spent literally over 3 years on this TV off and on now. And I think there's a lot of interesting things to talk about. So let's get right to a few things. Flyback. So, I'd mentioned that the flyback that was in there tested good. Yes, I used an ICO 944 flyback tester, and I tested both the replacement Stancor A8130 that I put into it that works fine, and the one that I took out, and they both test not only good, but very similar to each other, and physically they look very similar to each other. So why doesn't the one that was in it work? While editing the video, I noticed something I should have noted early on, which is the flyback I took out had a part number on it. I couldn't see it while it was installed in this stuff, but once I took it out, it was pretty easy to see. So I did repair the flyback. I epoxied it. Or rather super glued it, and I put a couple shims in. One just popped out. I didn't firmly attach them, but put them in there while the glue set up. And that does a really good job. Super glue on phenolic works quite well. So, what do we see over here? Sorry for the harsh lighting. I just made it better or worse. It says, what does it say? RTO-085, which is definitely a GE part number. Okay, so what does the service info say? It says RT071. Sorry for the horrible camera work there. And they also mentioned that on earlier versions there was a different flyback, and I did dig that up in some other literature about what they were earlier numbers in this series. It was an RTO dash, I think like a 063 and a 067, something like that, and then a 071 is the one I finally settled on. So this is a later flyback. I mean, basically as time went on, the part numbers increased. However, that's not the whole picture. So I mean, it's easy for me to say, okay, that's not the right flyback, that's why it doesn't work, move on. But, let me grab something that I just misplaced. What I have in my hand is a Thord Arson TV replacement parts guide. There were a number of companies that made replacement parts for TVs. I imagine you could go to RCA and get a replacement part, but there were a number of companies that existed that just sold replacement parts, so I'm guessing either they sold them for a lot less, or maybe it wasn't so easy to get them from the original manufacturers. I don't know. And also, it's a little curious to me because if you've been watching my videos, I have never to my best of my recollection, encountered a bad yoke or flyback or really their power transformer, really any major critical components. I've had some I suspected, or maybe they didn't work perfectly, like in this case, but none that were like fried or melted or open or anything like that. But there was RAM, Thord Arson, Stancor, and probably one in Merit. And over time some of them did merge, but they were around for a lot of years and they made a ton of replacement parts, so they must have failed. I've just been lucky, I guess. Alright, but here's my point. So what this does is it lists all the manufacturers and their part numbers and the equivalent replacement that Thord Arson made. So let's find the RTO 71 and 85. And if memory serves, we're going to see something interesting. So, hope you can see that. Here's the thing about camera work. So, when I do it handheld, it's so that I can see what the heck I'm shooting with the camera easily. In other words, I'm pointing the camera at what I'm looking at. When I put it on a tripod, yes, I have a viewfinder, but it still kind of can be tricky to maneuver around. But anyways, so here's all the RTOs. And look, the replacements, Fly 3, Fly 3, Fly 3, Fly 3, the 71, Fly 3, the 85, Fly 3. So, the universal replacement is the same. So if you were going to go, if you were servicing this and had a bad flyback and you went to Thord Arson, you'd get a Fly 3, which would substitute for either a 71 or an 85. But then why the heck did GE make a 71 and 85 if it's the same friggin' thing and they're interchangeable? That's the thing, they probably aren't. So why did they use, over the course of this set, why did they use 2, 3, 4 different flybacks? Because this is an early set, and they hadn't quite figured it all out yet. And if you look at the service info, they mention that the early ones use a laminated iron core, and then later ones used a powdered iron core. And I imagine there were some other differences. Like, if you recall, this one has this RC combo on top. I clipped out the cap, but there was one up there. There might be slight physical differences, like maybe the core was different thickness or slightly different permeability, slightly different composition. Maybe the wire gauge was a little bit different. As time went on, they kind of figured it all out, such that they could make universal replacements like the Stancor. If you recall, the paperwork said that it would replace any GE flyback. And as we just saw in the replacement guide, there were dozens of GE flybacks. But the Thord Arson Fly 3 is probably equivalent to this. So, all that being said, I suspect this could be made to work. If you recall, when I cobbled together a crude solid-state damper, a lot of the issues went away. And I think if I tinkered more with it, basically we had to redesign some of the circuitry, I could make it work well enough. Well, in my adventures of exploring all this, I decided it was time to read up on how this stuff all really works. The damper, the flyback, the horizontal output tube, the yoke, all that good stuff. I'm not going to talk about it here. I'm going to make a separate video just on that. It's something that I was a little fuzzy on, and I think it really needs to be gone over because I think part of the part of the reason I didn't understand it that well is I've yet to find a single publication that explained it well. So I've assembled about a dozen different publications, diagrams, and so on to kind of piece together how it all works as best I can understand. I'm sure I don't 100% grasp all of it, but enough of it, I think, to muddle my way through explaining how it all works. So we're going to leave the 8130 in there, especially since I got another one off of eBay. However, all was not well. I was the only bidder. I got it for a fair enough price. Looked to be new in the box, except that the seller, who I'm sure was very well intentioned, like many sellers, wrapped it in a mile of paper and bubble wrap, not realizing that while doing so they probably damaged it, because it is damaged. And likely this paper inner wrapper is what caused the damage, because, well, I guess it has been used, but it does look to be in really good condition. But it has a broken lead, just like the one that I have in the set. Fortunately, this one broke off right, one of these fine wires broke off near the donut. I'm going to have to dig a little bit to get at the other end. It's on the primary winding. So hopefully I can fix that. Otherwise, well, it's a paperweight. Alright, so the other thing I want to address is, while muddling my way through this set, a lot of you said, hey, why don't you try this, or hey, maybe it's that, or did you think of this, or did you try that? I'd like to address a lot of that stuff. I don't think it'll take too long. So let me redirect the camera, point it at the schematic, and go over some stuff. Notice I have a pile of tubes here. Well, as some of you suggested, try swapping the tubes. One of you in particular mentioned that they had heard that the set was picky about the 19 BG6. Well, while doing my recent tube sorting foray, I found a whole bunch of these. So I have at least 3 to try, and this one in particular I believe is new old stock. I did get a new old stock 25W4 damper tube. Made zero difference. But somebody asked about the damper tube and that strange number that it used, and it's we got enough off on a side tangent about how an earlier version of the set I think used a 25Z6, and that got me looking into other type of damper tubes to start with 25, and I came across, hey, 25AX4. We're going to try this. There's also a 6AX4. This is a superior re-engineered version of these like first generation damper tubes, the W's, the 6W4, 25W4. The AX4s are I think they have the same current rating and all, and they're basically drop-in replacements, but they work better. So we're going to try that. There have been some issues when I turn the brightness up with the picture kind of fading a little bit, so I'm going to try swapping the high voltage rectifier. I've tried a few different ones, didn't seem to make any difference, but we'll try that a bit too. Alright, so schematic time. So one thing a number of you had commented on was about the input signal being too strong. Maybe I didn't explain things very well, but if anything, it's too weak. Because I don't see an image until the contrast is up to about 75%. The contrast controls gain. Now, a lot of sets, most sets, would have AGC, and often the contrast controls the gain on the video amplifier. This has no AGC, and the contrast control controls the gain on the front end RF amp and the first IF stage, and that's it. Now the sync pulses are derived after the detector. So when I vary the gain, which was varying the gain right at the front end, it varies the gain not just of the video signal, but also the amplitude of the sync pulses, which is why the sync goes wacky when I mess with the contrast control. So I honestly think, after studying the schematic and thinking about it and playing with the set, that this is basically how it works. Which I imagine must have been a real pain if you were actually receiving an over-the-air signal that was varying in amplitude because of weather conditions or whatnot, you'd have to constantly be fiddling with that contrast control. Now, it's also got DC restoration, so when you turn down the gain, it just blacks out. That's what it's supposed to do. So, that's that. Now, after pouring through a bunch of textbooks, I only found one that mentioned having a really bright vertical line in the middle of the screen and some really horrible linearity. And they said, well, that will happen if this cap is open. The cathode bypass or filter cap. Now it's there, and I tried replacing it a couple times. It made no difference. However, I noticed the earlier revision of this set used a .047 on both sides, and this one has a .03, which is common to actually a lot of other designs. I'll get into that more in a separate video. I think it has to do with the resonant frequency of this circuit. But I was curious to try tinkering with that value, because even with this flyback, there is some residual ripple on that cathode. And it seems like the easiest way to try to eliminate that is to mess with this capacitor value a little bit. Something else to keep in mind is this was one of the first series strung TVs made. I think it was the first TV to use a 19 BG6. I think it might be the first series strung magnetically deflected TV, as contrasted to the series strung electrostatic TVs, which were pretty common. And the weird 3D construction technique. I mean, you put all that together, I suppose it's kind of remarkable that it works as well as it does. Because it does actually produce, it has really, really good bandwidth. You can see chroma dots on the image if you look close. Chroma dots, that's the color info. This TV was designed before there was color TV, so when you put a color signal into it, if the bandwidth is really wide and it's really well aligned, you'll actually see that color info come through as kind of weird dot patterns that vary depending on the actual color info that's there. So that's why I'm not going to mess with it. Yes, I agree that one of your comments about the IF, those 100 picofarad mica caps in the IF, are critical to the alignment, and some of them were off, and I replaced one of them. However, the alignment seems to be, the picture is so sharp, and those tuning slugs have a like glue on them. I don't want to mess with them. I don't want to try to break those shafts free, and the alignment procedure is one of the most complex I've seen. I don't think it's worth messing with. So, here's where we are at. I'm going to retire the flyback that came with it. I mean, I'll put it in a box and save it, but I'm not going to try using it in the set anymore. I'm going to strap down the full-size CRT. I'm going to tinker with that damper circuit a little bit. I'm going to try swapping out some tubes and maybe tinkering with that one capacitor to try to get any faint vertical lines that are left completely eliminated. And then I got to go through and tweak all the stuff that I took apart. Yes, I did mark it. I took reference photos of like where the ion trap magnet and stuff is, but I mean, who's to say it was perfect when I got the set? So I got to monkey with a lot of controls to get the picture centered right, to get the focus as best I can, and to get the horizontal and vertical linearity and width and height and all that good stuff all squared away. And I want to try tweaking the audio because it's got a bit of a hum to it that I'm not crazy about. By the time I'm done with all that and get this thing back in the friggin' cabinet, I'm done with TVs for a while. Well, sorry, I have to finish off the Admiral 20B1 combo set, but at least that TV's done. I just got to do the radio portion of it. Then we are going to go into Radio Land for a while. Barkhausen radiation. One or two of you mentioned that. That's an unusual phenomenon that happens in the horizontal output tube where I believe some kind of oscillation occurs between some of the elements, and it seems to be more a matter of the way the tube was manufactured than the way it's being used, because a simple solution is to swap out the tube. Or you can place a small magnet inside which deflects the electron beam inside the horizontal output tube such that the oscillations don't occur. That's actually a pretty rare phenomenon, and when it does happen, I have never seen it, but from what I've read, it creates just a thin line on the left-hand side of the screen. It does not create gross horizontal linearity issues, and also when we looked at the waveform on the cathode of the damper tube, we could see there was a big negative spike, which corresponded to the compression of the image, creating that bright line. Because what's happening is there's a drop in the current through the horizontal yoke, which means the electron beam is not traveling smoothly. It's pausing too long at one point on every scan line, which creates a brighter point. Mica mold paper caps. A number of you have mentioned this on a few projects, actually. Yes, there were mica-looking capacitors made that actually have paper caps inside. That's also pretty darn uncommon. I think I've seen it in one TV ever. I think just mica mold did it, and I think it was in a Motorola set. Pretty good rule of thumb: if the value is less than 1,000 picofarad and it looks like a mica cap, it's going to be mica. When you get to the ones that are like 4,700 picofarad, maybe it's paper. But even then, if it's in a critical circuit like, and this TV was in the horizontal flywheel coil, it's probably going to be mica. And I can assure you all the caps in this set that look like mica are mica. As far as shotgunning them and replacing all of them, maybe. Now, a few issues with that. One, they're expensive, and depending on the value, can be pretty hard to come by. The larger the value, the more expensive they are. Again, just once you get above 1,000 picofarad, they start getting a lot more expensive and less readily available and physically larger. That's why they're more expensive and then less commonly used too. Yes, I could use NP0 or C0G type ceramic. Another issue is some of the values are a little bit oddball, like 6 picofarad at 800 volts, and I think there's some 1,000 volt micas in there. Yes, 1,000 volt mica caps are still made. Again, harder to find, expensive. I figured to replace all the 20 or so mica caps in this set could easily cost $100 plus. It's not my set. I don't know if the owner would go for that. Plus, every single one I tested, except for the one bad one in the IF, tested fine, and this set seems to work pretty well. So, I'm not going to shotgun the mica caps, and generally I don't. Replacing controls. Mark Opat at Playthings of the Past, I believe. Yes, I'm aware of him. I've purchased controls from him in the past. He's helped me out in the past. He does have an amazing inventory. I've purchased some coils from him before as well. He does carry some flybacks and yokes and vertical output transformers and such. And he does have some controls, and he can build up, I believe, custom controls. But it can still be tough. The values are not the issue. The issue typically is the shaft length and the slots and the cut into the shafts and the shaft diameters, because you want the original knobs to fit. The knobs used on this GE set are kind of strange, so I think it'd be a little tough to get a replacement that would fit perfectly in the set and the knobs would fit on correctly. But yes, anything is possible. You could customize the shafts. I mean, if it came down to it, yes, it could be replaced. I'd rather not if I don't have to. And finally, about the line. So, vertical line. There's a few types that you could have. So there's something called a drive line. The left-hand side of the CRT screen is primarily controlled by the damper circuit. The right side is the horizontal output tube circuit. That drive control you adjust not only for optimal flyback efficiency to minimize the current through it while maximizing your high voltage output and to get the best linearity, but you also want to eliminate a drive line. So kind of right in the middle of the CRT is when it's sort of a handoff between the damper circuit and horizontal output circuit. When that isn't perfectly lined up, you get a bit of a discontinuity in the middle, and you get a bright line. That's what this set does. And by adjusting the drive control, you can eliminate that. The lines on the left side are absolutely from oscillations in the damper circuit. I want to do a dedicated video just on that. I think that covers everything that I wanted to talk about for now. Hopefully there won't be any more issues to discuss with this set. Fingers crossed. I'll leave you off with a look at the Bakelite, which I'm still cleaning up a bit. There are white specks on it here and there, which in the past I had argued was paint splatters or something like that. Some of you said, no, it's probably spider poop. I'm inclined to go with the spider poop theory, or insect poop of some type. It's kind of hard to get off, but it can be done. You just scrape it off with a fingernail or a toothpick or fine abrasive. I'd mentioned about the owner inscribing his name. I'll show you what I mean. So I noticed right away when I pulled the chassis out that there was a name stamped onto the side of it, Frank L. Ohm, and one of my restoration buddies online Googled that name and found out info about the guy. Yeah, he lived in the south side of Chicago, and he was, I don't know, I think in his 30s or so when the set was made. He passed away some years ago, but you can definitely Google that name and that address and find the guy. What I hadn't realized, though, he scratched his name into the cabinet in a few places, so it's right here in the back, and it's on the front as well. The front I have pretty well polished up, although it's got a bunch of dust settled on it now. But what's odd is this control panel is actually some kind of plastic. It's not Bakelite, it's like brown plastic, and he scratched his name or burned it into the bottom down there, so. I don't know if he was afraid of somebody walking off with his TV or what the deal was, but. Or, well, actually, what really confused me is, okay, I could see maybe putting your name on the outside. Who has a stamp of their name and address and would pull a TV chassis out and stamp it on the side? Unless the guy was really handy and kept this set running himself. I don't know. I don't have any clue. But that's kind of a shame. I mean, yeah, it lends some history to it, but otherwise this thing was so pristine. I mean, these so often get chipped, scratched, and sun-faded, and boy, this is, for such a large piece of Bakelite to survive this long. The main defects on it, I think, are actually molding defects, like these bumps here. I mean, that's in Bakelite. That's not, like, you know, like gunk on it or anything like that. Those are molding flaws. So, the owner, and again, this is not my TV. I'm doing this for somebody else, so he got himself a real prize with this one. Finally, I'm going to leave you with a tease of what I think will be the next major project. Going to go old school, going to go with a classic, and do a Philco 90. I think it'll be a good palette cleanser, and I think a lot of you guys will enjoy it. I know it's a classic. It's kind of a must-have for vintage radio collectors. So this one, I got a while ago, and it's been extremely heavily, completely modified, so much I wouldn't even call it a 90 inside. But I picked up a pristine 90 chassis. I believe it's 100% original. Got all the knobs, everything for it. And I'm so anxious to work on a radio and not a TV that I started poking around with it last night. When I got it, had no tubes, so I was going through my tube stash and digging out some tubes and checking out the chassis. Underneath, I believe it's 100% original. So this will be a fun little project, I think. And then after this, maybe a Philco 118, another classic design. I hope the next video in this series will be the final video in this series. That is all for now.